Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the third annual Justice for Women lecture presented by the University of Maine School of Law. My name is Peter Pittigoff. I'm Dean of the Law School, and I thank you all for joining us here tonight. This evening, we are so honored to welcome to Dr. Sima Samar as our Justice for Women lecturer. Dr. Samar is an amazing woman. She's courageous and kind. She's an inspiring leader in women's rights, in human rights, and in our continuing quest for justice. Sima Samar is chair of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission and has served in a variety of roles in healthcare, in education, in government, in politics, in policy, in social justice, and so much more. This evening we'll hear from her about how she's faced enormous challenges, how she's influenced the course of history in Afghanistan, and how she continues to inspire women in her home country and around the globe. In a few minutes you'll hear a proper introduction for Dr. Samar. It was about 4 years ago that the University of Maine School of Law established the Justice for Women Lecture Series, and the goal of the series is to engage people of Maine in a global conversation, a conversation about justice for women and girls in the developing world and justice in Maine. Tonight is the third annual lecture in the series, and we look forward to continuing this tradition for years to come. I'd like to add that the Justice for Women lecture series is a reflection of the values and the momentum of the University of Maine School of Law. As Maine's public law school, we take our public mission very, very seriously. It includes our mission to promote justice and to further understanding of this complex society today. We're an institution with a real commitment to Maine and making a difference in Maine, and with a global reach. A few thanks. I'd love to thank first our student volunteers who are helping tonight. They are members of the Women's Law Association at the law school, always an energetic and important group of leaders in our student body. Special thanks go to my colleagues Lexi Morris and Kayla Ramsey, who've been instrumental and unflappable as lead organizers for this event. As always, they've done a tremendous job. So let's give a thanks to Kayla and Lexi. I certainly extend very sincere thanks as well to all the many people and institutions who have supported this lecture series with generous donations. If you look in your program, there's a list of major donors to the lecture series. Also listed in the program are members of our advisory council for the Justice for Women lecture series. Again, an amazing group of people from the U.S. and overseas, people whom we count upon for advice and support. And of course, central to this exciting series is Catherine Lee. Kathy and I began discussing the Justice for Women lecture series a number of years ago, and it's her inspiration, her determination, her support that's given rise to this exciting lecture series and that continues to make it a success. You'll hear from Kathy at the end of the lecture. Kathy is a lawyer, an entrepreneur, a civic leader, founder of Lee International, and engaged in a global practice addressing issues of climate change. She travels extensively around the world and is passionate about justice for women and girls in the developing nations and here in the U.S. So thank you, Kathy. And now I'm very pleased to introduce Ms. Hawa Shear, who in turn will provide an introduction to Dr. Samar. Hawa Shear is a student at the University of Southern Maine. I've gotten to know Hawa just recently, and she's an impressive young woman. She loves science and is a diligent student studying biology and pharmacy. And Hawa is also a leader. She's president of the Muslim Students Association at the University of Southern Maine and has served as a mentor to other students and to other members of the community. What's been most striking to me as I've gotten to know Hawa in the last several weeks is how thoughtful, how reflective, how positive she is. Her parents came here from Afghanistan in the 1980s, and Hawa grew up in Portland. She speaks of balancing two cultures and speaks of her joy for both. She speaks of her love for Afghanistan, for Pashtun culture, for Islam, while also embracing her identity as an American, as a Mainer. Hawa wrote these words, and I quote, "My language is an amalgamation of two rich cultures which smoothly flow in and out of each other. I'm from Afghanistan. I'm from Maine." Please join me in welcoming Hawa Shir.
It is not often that I, as a student at USM, get the chance to introduce an internationally known activist and highly respected leader. A woman whose achievements influence those who search and fight for respect, dignity, and equality. Today, I have the distinct honor and pleasure to introduce to you all an inspiring woman who also happens to be from my country of origin, Afghanistan. She stands up for the rights of women in a country where there is an imbalance in the treatment of women. Our guest, Dr. Sima Samar, is currently the chairwoman of Independent Afghanistan Human Rights Commission. In this position, she oversees the implementation of nationwide women's rights education program and monitoring and investigating human rights abuses across the country. Dr. Samar was born in Afghanistan. She received a medical degree in 1982 from Kabul University. She founded the Shuhada organization, which now operates 55 schools for girls and boys in Afghanistan, and 3 schools for Afghan refugees in Quetta, Pakistan. During the Taliban regime, Shuhada schools in the central Afghanistan were among the schools that were open to girls. The Shuhada organization also ran underground homeschool classes for girls in Kabul. Dr. Samar has served as the Deputy Chair and Minister of the Women's Affairs for the Interim Administration for Afghanistan. She has been recognized for her leadership and her courage by dozens of global human and women rights organizations. In 2005, due to her courageous work for the cause of human rights, she was appointed as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights for Sudan. Please join me in giving Dr. Samar, the 2014 Justice for Women Lecture Series speaker, a warm Maine welcome.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Hawa, for a nice introduction. And thanks to Kathy and Peter to give me the opportunity to come and share my views and my thought about our country to all of you. As she said, that I'm coming from Afghanistan, and I think Afghanistan is a country, unfortunately, become very famous with the violence and aggression. But the reality is that Afghanistan become a country that Cold War was fought, a proxy war was fought in Afghanistan. And we are at war, unfortunately, since 35 years. So the whole generation of Afghans since this 35 years grown up and lived during the war and conflict. Of course, the war began with the coup d'etat in Afghanistan in 1978, And then after a year, we had the Russian came practically with their troops in Afghanistan in 1979. Since then, since the coup d'etat, we lost a lot in Afghanistan. We lost our educated people. Practically a brain drain happened in Afghanistan, the one who was taken by the regime and disappeared. And the majority of the educated people from Afghanistan left the country. So when I go anywhere, including Bangladesh and Philippines, I see Afghans. Even in a country like Bangladesh, who would go and try to get asylum or live over there and prefer on their own country. Even if your country is destroyed and developed, it's your own country, and that's the nature of human being. That's why we keep saying that I'm an Afghan or I'm an American. As Hawa said that she's an Afghan, she's an American. Although her father is an Afghan. I don't know if she has an Afghan identity, but she feels connected to the country. So we've gone through a lot of different wars. Of course, the most conservative, after the invasion of the Russian, the most conservative group of people was chosen by the international community, including Americans and Europeans and the Arab countries, in order to get support and fight against communism or against Russians in Afghanistan. So practically the civilian, the people, the normal people of Afghanistan was caught in between, particularly the women. And women were really forgotten because they were not taking the Kalashnikov and they were not fighting. So we had millions of Afghans as refugees in Pakistan and Iran. And because of the invasion of Russia, of course, the whole Islamization began in the region. We had the Islamic Revolution of Iran. We all know about it. We had the Islamization policy of Ziaul that made Islam very much a political Islam rather than the real religion of peace, or a real religion between you and your God. You know, it's become a tool, unfortunately. So the woman in Afghanistan was completely forgotten, even by the international community. And nobody was paying attention, of course, on education. So that's why we have a whole generation of uneducated people. And they could be used as a suicide attacker easily by the people who has their political interest and using them against the people. Then, of course, we had different regime. The Russian stayed for 10 years until 89 in Afghanistan, and finally there was an agreement in Geneva. Then the Russian soldier left Afghanistan. The reason I'm saying that the Russian, they had 150,000 soldiers in Afghanistan, and it was under one command of control. So they were so close to Afghanistan, they were flying from Tajikistan or Uzbekistan, from Dushanbe or Ashgabat from Turkmenistan. And after 15 minutes, they were in Afghanistan and they were bombing the villages in Afghanistan. So, I mean, besides arresting all those intellectual, good Afghans committed to the country, a lot of destruction happened, a lot of villages destroyed during the bombing. And it was arbitrary bombing. And it was a lot of mass killing of people in different villages in Afghanistan. So you go in any province in Afghanistan, you find mass graves during that period. And then, of course, none of the side paid a lot of attention on education because the war was the priority and the militarization of the society was the priority. Then the Russian left Afghanistan in 1989, and then we had the pro-Russian regime still in power, and there was fight between the Mujahideen and the pro-Russian regime in Afghanistan. Finally, in 1992, that regime fallen, and Mujahideen government went into Afghanistan. And unfortunately, they began to fight among themselves. And it was more destruction in the country, more killing, more misuse of ethnicity and language and religion in the country. Then it was, of course, a lot of anarchism in the country. Each part of the city in Kabul was controlled by one ethnic group and one political party. And they were, again, a lot of killing, destruction, violence against human rights, and violence against women happened. And then we had the Taliban, of course, in 1994, because in Pakistan, of course, the Afghan children, the Afghan refugee children was taken to the religious, so-called religious school, and they were brainwashed. In 1994, the Pakistanis were sending their convoy of goods through Kandahar to Turkmenistan, and it was stopped by different Mujahideen group. So they organized another young group of Afghans under the name of Taliban, of course, with a lot of support by Pakistan and Pakistan Army, to Kandahar to release their goods. So they came to Kandahar and they released their Pakistani goods, and they took power in Kandahar. So this is 1994, September 1994. 1995, they took Herat, and then 1996, all of them were on September. September 1996, they took Kabul. So then the Taliban was in power. What they did actually, they closed down everything for women. They closed down the girls' school. They claimed that as soon as we get the country, control the country, and then collect the arms from the different groups, then we will open the school, because we want our female member of the society to be secured and respected and so on. So even the women were not allowed to walk on the street, and they were beaten up in the street, and they asked the families, particularly in the cities, to even paint their windows because the women should not be seen, and the women were not allowed to wear high heel shoes because their footstep will cause destruction to Taliban. So then a lot of NGOs, a lot of international AIDS organizations were supporting Afghan refugees. But in 1992, when the Russian collapsed, the USSR collapsed, then most of them left, particularly the American NGOs. And Afghanistan was completely isolated. I mean, they did not really pay attention because the main enemy was the USSR, not the other group. So the agenda and the objective to destroy the USSR and stop the communism. Of course, we had a lot of development in the USSR and the Eastern Europe. We all know that the Germans were united. The war in Balkans began. The Czech and Slovak was separated. So a lot of things was happened. So Afghanistan was isolated. And that isolation gave the possibility to the Taliban, unfortunately, the Taliban regime, that everybody from all over the world, the one who were part of the aggression, were violent, they came and used Afghanistan as a training camp. We had the bombing on the US embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. Then they realized that it was Al-Qaeda, and the whole group was established in Afghanistan. I think you all, I don't know how much the young generation doesn't remember, but the older generation who were following the Afghanistan politics, they remember that it was Clinton administration when they fired missiles in Afghanistan. They fired one night 85 missiles in Afghanistan and some missiles on Sudan because they were looking for bin Laden, and Al-Qaeda and bin Laden was accused of the bombing in both of the embassies. And practically they were relying on the information from ISI. So ISI was playing the middleman, and they give the information to Al-Qaeda and they give the information to Americans. So when they fire 85 missiles, It was 13 people who were killed, young, very junior Bangladeshis and some Pakistanis and some Afghans, not the main leaders of Al-Qaeda. And some of the missiles did not explode, and then the Chinese bought it from the Taliban regime in order to get the technology. So I was lobbying for to United States that the isolation in Afghanistan will be very, very dangerous. We had meetings with some friends, with State departments and some officials. And I have to say that I'm so grateful to a group of women in the United States who really stopped the Clinton administration from recognizing the Taliban regime, because they were interested on the pipeline through Afghanistan from Turkmenistan. So there was a big competition between the two companies, Unicol from the US and I think Brandeis from Mexico? No, from one of the Central American, Chile, or one of them, I think. So it was a lot of competition, and they wanted really to recognize the Taliban regime in order to pass the pipeline from Afghanistan to get the oil from Turkmenistan. But then I have to say that accidentally, Emma Bonino, who is currently the foreign minister of Italy, she was the EU commissioner, the European Union commissioner for humanitarian aid. She came to Kabul, and then she went to one of the women's hospitals in Kabul and saw that a colleague of her was taking some photograph, and she was arrested by Taliban because taking photograph during Taliban was not allowed. Music was not allowed, television was not allowed. So practically the people had no freedom, not men and women both, but particularly women. And then when she was arrested, and then a United Nations interfered, she was released after 3-4 hours from Kabul, and then when she came back to Europe, then she had 8 March of 1998 named a flower for women in Kabul. So I was accidentally in Germany in another conference, maybe on women's rights or something. So I called her office and I said, I wanted to see Emma Bonino and ask her to at least to do some awareness raising about the situation of women in Afghanistan. So I called and she said, why don't you come tomorrow to Brussels, because I'm going to have a press conference on this issue and give awareness to the people about the women's situation in Afghanistan. So I went there, a friend of mine, an Afghan, who drove me to Brussels. So I participated on the press conference with the president of Feminist Majority from the US and a feminist from Spain. I forgot her name, but I see still her face. And there was another one, a lady from a very famous women's rights activist from Italy. So I appeared in the press conference under the burqa because I was going back and I was continuing to do the work. So that was a good move because Feminist Majority become to know what is the condition of women in Afghanistan. So they began a big campaign to stop gender apartheid in Afghanistan, and then the Clinton administration stopped recognizing the Taliban regime because they were even saying that, well, the Taliban brought security, and I was saying that, yes, the graveyard is more secure than any other place. I mean, practically Afghanistan turned to be something like that. Anyway, then it was 9/11, unfortunately, and it was a great loss of human life, and it was a big tragedy for all of us. And it was a criminal act, of course. In my view, it was against a crime against humanity, because the civilian should not be killed that way. Then it was the international intervention, including the US intervention in Afghanistan. The Taliban regime was removed from power, and we had the new administration. I have to say that we achieved a lot in the last 13 years with a lot of sacrifice by Afghans and by the international community in terms of the money they spend in Afghanistan, in terms of the life they lost in Afghanistan. The people in Afghanistan do realize that. And imagine when the women were not allowed to go to school. Now we have more than 3 million girls going to school. We have girls in the universities. We have 25% of women in the parliament. We have women ministers. We have women in a higher position. I hold one of the position. So there is a lot of achievement. But I would say that we still have a lot of problem also. Because Afghanistan, particularly this year, in 2014, we are going through few transition. One of the transition that you all know that we had a lot of international soldiers in Afghanistan. 47 countries had their soldiers in Afghanistan. Then there was the decision that they should build our national army and national police, because in 2001, when we went to Afghanistan, there were no national army and national police. The one who came to Kabul first, the group who took Kabul first, they were national army and they were national police. They were also intelligence